Perfect. Thanks. Okay, well then I will pass it over to Emily or Ryan. I'm not sure who's kicking it off to go through the presentation. Let me know if you're having any trouble sharing.
Great. Thanks, Dana. Thanks, everybody.
Do you want me to share my screen or should you drive for this one?
Emily, how about you drive from
Okay,
the
great.
get-go, that we don't have to do a switch and risk disaster.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Great. Like I said, thanks again, everybody, for making the time to chat about the transportation system plan again. My next slide. So just a quick reminder, this is for the folks on Zoom. Just remember to stay muted if we're not speaking. And then for the folks on Zoom, if you want to comment, there's a raise hand feature. That's probably the easiest way to let us know. And then I know, Dana, we've got your email up there. So if there's something we don't get to during this meeting, or a question or something like that that occurs to you that we just don't get to, feel free to email Dana. Dana, I'm okay offering that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So our agenda today, since it's been a minute since we last met, we're going to go through just a quick reminder about what this whole process is about. We went through that last time, but we'll breeze through it this time. But the bulk of the meeting today is really to review existing and future transportation conditions. So this analysis is kind of the foundation for the transportation system plan update. So we need to have a good understanding of what the issues, needs, opportunities, constraints are today and what they're likely to be in the future, so that we can talk more with you and the community about what the right transportation solutions are for Bandon. And then we'll kind of end that, we'll go through that material, but then we really want to have a discussion with you all. The intent today is to make sure that we are capturing your thoughts in terms of what the issues and needs are, and making sure we've got the full picture. And then we'll cover next steps. Next slide, please. We can already breeze past introductions. Already had a schedule. So just a quick reminder, we have 5 meetings of this group. This is meeting number 2. And that the PAC is really critical in terms of advising both city staff, Dana and us, the consultant team, and Tom and ODOT and others, as we work to develop this TSP update. Ultimately, the Planning Commission will review the transportation system plan as well and make a recommendation to the City Council, who will then stamp, sign, seal, and deliver the document when we're done at the end of the day. So briefly, just a reminder, what is a transportation system plan? So it's a plan that looks at transportation needs and solutions now, but also out 20 years. And at the end of the day, TSPs include projects, so things we're going to build, new sidewalks, new roads, new intersections, you name it. But also programs, and that could be things that we're not necessarily constructing, but for example, parking management programs. It also includes policies, updated policies, as well as we're going to take a look at standards. So what are the standard roadway widths and things like that that the city maintains when new roads are being developed. And the previous TSP is well over 20 years old, so it's high time to update it. Next slide. And also just a reminder that as part of the TSP, we're looking at all modes. And a mode is a way of getting around. So that includes walking, driving, biking, bus, freight, deliveries. And And then right here, a couple of special focuses we know, and that's going to be a lot of what we talk about today in terms of existing and future conditions. US 101, balancing the needs of different people who use it and also looking at safety. Developing streets that work for everybody, no matter how they get around. Looking at how the TSP can support can support both local travel and the needs of everybody who lives in Bandon, but also manage those impacts from tourism traffic. And then lastly, and we know another important thing that we'll talk about some today and more in the future is how we can improve connections across and through town. And to put a finer point on some of this as well, these are some of the objectives from the original grant that Dana and the city got to fund the TSP work. But a couple of things I want to point out here too is that, transportation is really important to supporting the economy in Bandon and around and the region. So that's an important consideration of the TSP update. We also want to make sure we're considering costs when we get to developing transportation solutions, right? We know funds are limited. So in all cases, we want to be thinking about how we can prepare TSP solutions that can actually be funded and built. I already mentioned that the connectivity issue and how we can make better connections, particularly through the Bandon Donut Hole. And then another important consideration there, the last line is, there's a lot of sensitive environmental, cultural, historic resources in Bandon. So we want to make sure we're considering all of those, as well as sustainability in general, when we're developing transportation system improvements. Next slide. So schedule, here we are in fall of 2023. So we'll be coming back to you later this winter to talk more about improvement alternatives. That's really the fun stuff that we'll get into with this group around what are some of the ideas for addressing these issues and needs we're going to talk about today. And then as we get later in the year, we're going to kind of hone in on what are the best solutions for inclusion in the TSP, get the TSP updated and get it adopted ideally next fall of 2024. Before we move on to Emily, who will lead us through existing conditions, are there any questions, comments kind of about what the TSP is all about or where we're headed?
I had one question. The slide that used the word or the term VMT when you're talking about environment, can you define that?
Yeah, sorry about that. As planners, we sometimes get trapped in acronyms. VMT is vehicle miles traveled. So how many miles driven by people on a daily basis, for example. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Emily, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sure thing. So our existing and future conditions reports were conducted based on some technical analysis, but then also talking to the city and then some community representative interviews that we conducted. So combination of hearing from everyone and doing some actual technical analysis to figure out what the transportation system in Bandon looks like today. So one of the main things that we looked at, as Ryan kind of touched on, was the street network. There's not a lot of connected north, south, and east, west roads. So a lot of travel funnels onto some major roadways. And we were kind of exploring some options for looking at the street connectivity as a whole through Bandon. In particular, the donut hole. You can kind of see in this picture on the right, just how there's not really a connective roadway that goes through this area. So kind of just looking at other opportunities for roadway connections. We also looked at conflicts between vehicle traffic and pedestrian and biking on US 101. So examining how those modes could kind of both use the road in a more functional way. And US 101 currently doesn't meet state ODOT standards for bike and pedestrian facilities on US 101 under the Blueprint for Urban Design. So bike lanes, sidewalk widths, those kind of things. We took note of that. For freight travel through town, US 101's a freight route and a reduction review route and a major roadway through town. We heard from a lot of people that congestion on US 101 when trucks are trying to turn on and off US 101 creates some issues, kind of blocking cars on the roadway, blocking people trying to cross the street. Other roadway connections were explored to kind of look at how trucks could avoid passing through this main area of Bandon, maybe getting to their destinations in a more efficient way. We also looked at truck loading zones. So there's no truck loading zones in Bandon, which can sometimes cause issues when trucks, big giant freight trucks, are parked in Old Town or near grocery stores and can kind of inhibit travel for folks in these areas. We also looked at traffic and parking. So a big thing that we heard, I'm sure you all have experienced the increase in traffic and parking during the summertime. So especially during our stakeholder interviews, talking to folks about ways that they use Old Town or don't, if it's kind of busy finding parking or getting around in that area. We also talked about how there is actually a lot of parking available in public parking lots. It's just not very clear for people how to get to those parking lots. Street parking and parking anywhere in Bandon doesn't have any time limits, so you can park there all day theoretically and not move your car, which makes it difficult for folks who want to pop in and park for a short amount of time.
What?
And also,
Oh.
oh, someone asking a question?
No, I think someone accidentally unmuted. We're just gonna mute them.
Okay. Great. Also lack of crosswalks for pedestrians and bicyclists who are trying to get from parking lots to their destinations. So kind of looking at how people are parking and getting around in general. And another aspect is access to the transit stop, the bus stop at Rays. So how are people able to access these areas and get around more comfortably and safer?
Emily, before you move on, can you go back to that slide? I just wanted to ask the group, and we have a discussion period after this, but I want to ask this now. So we've heard about increase in tourism traffic during the summer. One thing we've encountered in other coastal communities we've done work in is that tourism is kind of year round now, and there's not necessarily a quiet season, or it's less of a quiet season than it used to be. So I'm curious from the perspective of this group about, are those impacts really limited this summer? Are they year round? And then how does that affect how you think locals interact with downtown? As in, does it prevent people from going to downtown, things like that?
Chris, do you have any? I feel like you might have input on that being.
Yeah, the summer, basically May to October, a lot of the locals don't come into Old Town. But after that, they all come back and, and make their usual haunts, and it's, but it is, yeah, you're around the holidays and the holiday weekends, it is kind of like a mini summer, so it's, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, it's tough to kind of find parking, but, the places fill up, but I haven't seen anybody. I mean, sometimes people drive around the block 3 or 4 times and find a spot, so it's, not that bad.
I'm kind of curious, do you think that people are parking for a really long time, like parking in one spot and then just leaving their car all day? Like especially in front of your store?
Not all day.
Not all day.
No, and the people who do that are the people who kind of live down there.
Hmm.
They do that, or they're doing some work on something,
Yeah.
they'll park out in front, but, yeah, a lot of them are there for 15, 20 minutes and they move on, maybe half hour.
Mm-hmm.
Some do park and, explore the whole area.
Yeah. I just know I've personally been guilty of parking in Old Town all day, and then I think I'm the worst planner ever because I just park here all day long. What about the rest of you?
I think Bandon is a little different than other coastal towns because we're so much further away from a city. Different than Florence, different than Newport. So I think we are more seasonal. Chris, I would agree. It's pretty slow now. It's pretty nice. You can go wherever you want to go. The other thing is that because I ride my bike everywhere, I see a lot of things. And some days before the stores even open, around 10-ish, there are a lot of cars down there and there's no really tourists. And so people that work there take up a lot of parking. So that, and they park there all day. So that's what I've noticed.
That's true.
I think someone brought it up once, though, that it's really hard, maybe because of lighting or anything else, that if employees aren't parking out front of their businesses, it doesn't look like the business is open. And so some people will park on like First or Second Street just to make it look like people are in town, because otherwise you wouldn't know. Kind of an interesting idea.
I don't have that much problem coming to town and finding a parking space, even in the summer.
Mhm.
And I've never had to park on the new lot on Fillmore because I've always found something else. That's always there and it's always empty.
Mhm.
And one more follow-up question. I think one thing we heard about early on, I just wanted to check this, was that sometimes there's an issue of either like trucks and trailers or trucks and boats or large RVs taking up a lot of street parking in places that maybe is not super desirable, but I wanted to check to see if that's a perceived issue of this group as well.
I was gonna mention that, yeah, during the summers, during peak fishing season, there'll be a lot of boat trailers and things parked, and RVs too. That's not happening right now because the port is closed for the next 6 months or so that's not an issue, but it will be again. And whenever the Marriott goes in, all the big RVs that usually park in that lot, we have to work better at figuring out where they can park and better signage and directing people to the lot at Fillmore. We park there frequently just to walk farther, but it's almost always empty, a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's something that we heard from a lot of folks, that they always see the public parking lots not full at all. There's parking available. It's just, parking in front of a business, people are more likely to want to not drive around the block to park. So this is just reinforcing. So thanks everyone for contributing your thoughts.
And very quickly on the sort of trucks parking in Old Town, we had talked to Margaret about that a little bit. Just trying to figure out where are they parking and are those good locations? And so I think most, if I'm understanding, but people who are in Old Town more often, correct me, they're parking on Chicago in the center of the street and people just go around them. Does that sound about right?
You talking about delivery trucks?
Delivery trucks, like Cisco or whatever
They'll be
else.
on First Street a lot.
Yeah.
So First
That's
Street
what
I
too.
Yeah, I did have one on Delaware a week or so ago
Yeah.
that I couldn't get by.
Oh,
But
wow.
fortunately, I was going to the Vision Center, so I parked beside it. It's probably created more of a problem.
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you think there would be any value in creating like a loading zone in Old Town, or would that just be complicated? And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I'm just curious.
I don't know whether they cause that big a problem.
Okay. That's
Well,
good.
it all depends on where you're talking like just having one loading zone and everybody's gotta get to it.
I guess what I'm getting at is like, I've seen the trucks parked just in the center of the street and then people just somehow find a way to make it work and go around them, but wondering if it's a problem to the extent that we should be considering some sort of solution to
And
it.
I've seen it parked more onto one side, like,
Yeah,
right now, for the life of me, I can't think of the street where the Minute Cafe is.
Oh, yes, the street that you're on?
No,
Oh, okay.
the one, yeah, the one down, yeah. They'll park next to there, and then so there's 2 lanes so they can go around it,
Got it.
but they'll hit like, Foley's and they'll hit, the arcade and that, they'll hit like 2 or 3 spots in that area.
Okay.
But yeah, they'll pull around, hit the park on the side and get to the big wheel.
Hmm.
But then they'll go around the corner and park on First Street and kind of by backside of Bandit Coffee Cafe,
Yeah.
over there, where the wheelhouse is kind of right.
Yeah.
Yeah, La Fiesta somewhere right in there.
I get by them easily enough.
You
Yeah.
can.
Okay. Thanks for indulging me.
Okay, one more question. Thanks for continuing to indulge me as well. Does this group, do you feel safe? Emily has this bullet here, but do you feel safe crossing the street downtown, especially, or Old Town, especially during the busier times?
No.
You don't feel safe?
Well, the part, there's traffic that comes off of 101 at Bandon Coffee. And so the traffic is going 30, and then, you know, hopefully they hit the brakes because there's picnic tables and we're sitting out there and having coffee. But people are crossing back and forth because they want their coffee. Not everybody can park right on the same side of the street as Bandon Coffee. So that to me is dangerous because I keep thinking some little kid's gonna run out of the car, cross the street, but adults look at their phones and they're looking at their phone. They don't even know that a car is coming off of 101. That to me is real dangerous.
And I think just to clarify for the consultant team, you're talking about the arches off of Highway 101 where people
Right.
are coming through those
Right.
arches, yeah. And it's the craziest intersection of Delaware,
I-
Highway 101.
Yeah, when you get down in the heart of Old Town,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter where it is. They want to get to the other side, they go across the street. If it's too warm, they want to take their coat off in the middle of the street, they take their coat off in the middle of the
Mhm.
street.
yeah.
I worry sometimes I might be a little upset and just hit the gas and run them over.
I do have to say
biggest-
people are bold there, yeah.
The biggest danger is the one-way traffic coming the wrong way.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's another.
That's the
good
biggest
Yeah.
danger. You're
Yeah.
only expecting it to come from the right way.
Mhm.
Well, as a driver going down, especially again, First Street, you know, if you've got a big truck or RV parked right by a corner, you can't see people
Right,
standing on the
right.
corner
Right.
waiting to cross. And so I'm always like, okay, where are the kids? Who can't I see?
Mhm.
You know, as I'm driving down there. And the other thing, as a pedestrian, walking across 101, which is a little, you know, north of Old Town, but from the, what's the restaurant right there? By
Which one?
the station,
Oh.
that intersection, crossing across 101, you know, over to,
Mhm.
that's, you have to really pay attention, as a driver and as a pedestrian, if you're walking across that intersection, because it's, people don't always see the pedestrians when they're trying to turn. on where they-
Yeah, people making a turn,
Yeah.
the biggest danger there.
Right.
Mhm.
Sorry, to clarify, which area is this crossing? Is it an existing crosswalk or is it just where people are kind of walking across US 101?
Fillmore and 101.
Fillmore, okay, great, thank you.
There's a light there. We'll mark it.
Yeah, there's a light, but I'm trying to remember, there's no turning lane,
There's
so
no
people are often very bold when they make turns there because they're just trying to get out. And then if people are trying to cross, you
And
can't
they're not
always,
paying attention to the.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So that is a challenging intersection.
Thanks, everyone. And we'll talk more. I think Emily's going to talk more about 101 here in a second, so I'll have more questions about that.
Yes, definitely. But first, another slide about traffic, and this one, I apologize, there's a lot of acronyms in here, so bear with me. Mobility targets are basically the ODOT measures of how long it takes drivers to get through intersections on US 101. So we looked at US 101 to figure out where traffic was happening, and if it was meeting ODOT standards. So the only one that actually did not meet mobility standards was US 101 and 42S, which is also 2nd Street Southeast here. So that was the one intersection that didn't meet the standards, and we'll be looking at this for measures to make sure that this will meet targets in the future. However, we know that traffic congestion on US 101 feels like there's a lot of delays as well, and we want to acknowledge that perceptions of traffic congestion are equally important to consider, because drivers might behave in ways that compromise safety, as Dana just mentioned, kind of, you know, pulling out quickly or making turns. And also delays just can be really frustrating. So although this is the one intersection specifically, we're looking at congestion on US 101 as a whole as well. So walking in Bandon, we heard from a lot of folks during our interviews that Bandon feels generally pretty walkable, that it's enjoyable. However, they really focused on safer crossings for pedestrians and bicyclists. As we kind of already started talking about on US 101, That was kind of the main focus that we kept hearing over and over again. And as we talk about our safety stuff, we'll kind of refocus back on this. We also looked at where there are gaps in the sidewalk system in Bandon. So a big one is Beach Loop Road, just hugging the coastline where people are driving, people are walking. There's not really a designated space for people to be, so it can cause some confusion between all those modes using the same space at the same time. 11th Street has the north sidewalk, but no sidewalk on the south side. We also looked at 8th Street near the schools and how kids walking around before school maybe don't have a straightforward sidewalk to walk on. And then Oregon Ave was brought up as a connection between the school area and the park area connecting to Old Town. There are not sidewalks on Oregon right now, and it's kind of winding. So people mention that they do walk on that street, but it doesn't necessarily feel like the safest route. We also looked at Jetty, and we know that there's the project that's going on very soon, or maybe has started already. I'm not completely sure, but that's just one kind of smaller segment of the larger path along Jetty. So looking at sidewalk gaps throughout the city, and kind of found that these were the focuses that kept coming up from folks and from looking at our mapping. We also looked at street lighting. Looks like there's mostly pedestrian scale street lighting in Old Town. So at night, some people reflected that in more popular places, such as near the park and along 11th, it gets pretty dark and walking doesn't feel as safe without street lighting. Kind of that same thing was reflected for Beach Loop. So we'll just be kind of looking at how street lighting might improve the walking and biking in Bandon and make people feel a little bit safer getting around.
I'd like
Oh,
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to that list, Seabird.
Yes, yeah, great point. Especially as there's an increase in development in that area, we'll definitely be looking at Seabird as a place where we could improve some sidewalk connections for people. Thank you for bringing that up. Does anyone else have any other suggestions for areas where there are significant sidewalk gaps that might want to be focused on?
Or other places where it's hard to cross the street too.
Yeah,
I'm just curious how folks feel about Oregon Avenue, because that scares the crap out of me when I drive on it, much less walk.
Which one is that?
That's the one after the gravel lot that you could get out of Old Town
So
and
if
go
you're
up to
going
like
up
by the
from
church.
Where the market is.
Yeah,
Oh,
would you,
Oh,
I'm just kind of curious if that's a place where people want sidewalks. I mean, I know we want sidewalks everywhere, but if that was really a priority.
well, actually,
Right.
Dana, I kind of want to reframe this as how would people rather get from the schools and parks area to Old Town? Like if there's a street that makes more sense as a connection to look at.
We have the pathway, is that what you're?
Yeah, go down
Yeah.
Monkey Hill. I would walk down Oregon Hill, walk down Monkey Hill, takes you right at Old Town.
Mhm.
People just need to know about it.
Yeah,
Right.
so Chris
And are
is
there
talking
sidewalks
about,
to get to that? I'm trying to,
maybe
Yeah.
not from, I'm trying to think, I feel like there's a sidewalk.
if you were coming,
cuts off by the church though.
It cuts off by the church, so, yeah, so I don't, Emily, Monkey Hill is from, Devon's Boutique in Old Town. In that area, there's a pathway that kind of meanders up a hillside past Bandon Inn and then meets up with Oregon Avenue, which I feel like turns into something else, but I could be wrong. And then, so then meet up with Fourth, yeah. So maybe there is a small gap in that section that would take you from Monkey Hill, the end of that pathway to Fourth.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. I'll
Yeah,
have to look at a map afterwards, but thanks for bringing that up.
yeah.
Awesome.
And maybe, again, that's just like signage would help rather than new pathways.
Right, right. Yeah, just making people more aware of a connected path could be part of the battle. So biking, there's not too many designated bike facilities in Bandon. And there may be some really great streets to ride on, but this is kind of going back to that signage aspect that we were just talking about. There's this concept of a neighborhood greenway, which is using some streets that may already be lower speed and more comfortable for people to bike on, but just making minor improvements, some really cost-effective ways to improve these streets for people biking around. Some areas could definitely benefit from bike lanes, but a lot that we heard from people is that it's more comfortable to ride on these quieter streets. So kind of looking at ways that we can connect a bike network through the neighborhoods to popular destinations and make it feel safe and comfortable for people of all abilities, including kids and people of all ages. So curious kind of to hear people's thoughts. We heard from some people varying levels of interest in designated bike facilities in Bandon, but would really love to hear more about where you'd like to see improved connections and where you think that it might be good to invest some more time looking at connections through Bandon.
Christine, I know you have an opinion on this one.
Well, anyone that rides 10 or 11 miles a day, you want to ride on as many streets as you can. You don't always want to take side streets. They're short. They don't take you anywhere. We do our grocery shopping on our bikes. So that means 101, it means 11th, it means Seabird. It means Beach Loop because of where we live. Getting over to Ray's up by the cemetery. I forgot where the
June
sewer
or
plant.
Harlem? Oh,
June.
Riverside, is that what you're?
Oh, and
Caroline?
Riverside,
Yeah.
Riverside should really be on your list for roads, by the way. So if you want to go some distance, you want straight shots. You know, you don't want to make a whole lot of turns and you don't want to hit dead ends and there's basically no bike lanes.
Yeah.
And cars go too fast, lots of tourists, they go too slow. Some stop in the middle of the street, speed, I think, is a big deal. And there's no signage for biking. I mean, there's one sign on Beach Loop that says bike, and that's supposed to be a bike, a designated bike route. River Road is supposed to be a designated bike route. I don't even drive the road. It's too dangerous. So cyclists in town, I think, have a really difficult time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask a clarifying question about Riverside. So when you mentioned adding that to the list, do you mean explicitly for biking facilities or for walking facilities as well?
You have that nice marsh there, which would be nice to walk. There's an art gallery. They're always trying to get, what's that event that you do?
Oh,
Wine walk.
The wine walk. Yeah, they're always trying to bring people down to the gallery, but there's no place to walk.
Right. Yeah, and the Oregon Coast bike route being directed onto Riverside, but that not feeling like a safe route right now. You can call it a bike route, but if it doesn't feel safe, then it's not doing its full job. So thank you for bringing up that point as well.
You have blind curves, dozens of them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I looked at it on the aerial because the consultant team had brought up, well, could people all take Riverside instead of Highway 101? And I gave the same feedback that when I rode my bike into work, I always took Highway 101 instead of Riverside. And I think the aerial, it doesn't look that curvy, but when you're driving or walking or biking it, it's so hard to see anything. Yeah. So I do think if there were a way to put improved pathway or something, be great. I think we've been physically constrained by the river being on one side and then sort of that hillside being on the other.
There's a deep drop beside the road.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
looking at my way to town,
It's dangerous.
because that's the way I drive to town most of the time.
Oh.
But I drive very slowly because I know there could be bicycles and there are blind curves there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I have never actually thought about like what the drop off is on either side, but I think what they had looked at in the past for a pathway there was like a boardwalk path.
Would have to be.
Or, yeah, something, because otherwise you couldn't really put any
Mm,
pavement. I'm sure there's cultural resources all on.
Another, because you have commercial one side and then like cultural stuff
Yeah.
in those hills is like, it's a sticky,
And then
like,
there's
because, yeah,
steep
like I drive
banks.
down there and it's like, is a little sketchy,
Mhm.
but. So like, understand like, there does need to be some kind of improvement, it's just a matter of like, okay, how do we physically, realistically, like. Meander around these, not problems, but just bumps,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, these are really, really great things to consider for when we're thinking through potential improvements. So this is really valuable. Thank you. Okay. Any more thoughts about biking before I move on? Okay. So moving into safety, when we looked at our safety analysis, I'm sure no one's so surprised that most crashes are happening on US 101. And this section that I have pulled up on the right is where we saw the highest number of crashes. Tom from ODOT will kind of take another stab at talking about the crash history on US 101, but just kind of a high level assessment. As we talked about earlier, it can be really stressful for people walking to cross US 101. Also, that curve can present some visibility issues for people driving. So even though the speed is posted at 30 miles per hour, people are often not going that speed. And these kind of blind curves are sometimes a problem for both people driving and walking and biking. Another thing we looked at was the crosswalk distance. So we looked at where those crosswalks are and what the spacing is, and that's what these little teal dots are showing. So 42S between there and Fillmore is 2,400 feet. So anyone looking across in that area has to walk really far if they're trying to cross at an actual crosswalk. We know that the new crosswalk is going in or has gone in on Chicago. So that's kind of mitigated a little bit of this distance between Fillmore and 9th. However, there are still some big gaps. So we're kind of taking note of that and assessing these distances between crosswalks because it can feel quite far for people to cross safely at these crosswalks sometimes.
Can I ask two questions of the group on this? One of the limitations of our safety analysis is right that we're using reported crashes usually, right? And so it can be hard for us to know if there are places where there are like near misses happening a lot or things like that. So if this group has thoughts about places where you see sketchy stuff happening in terms of safety on 101 or elsewhere, that'd be great to know. And then second is, there's other places on 101, a couple places have been mentioned already, where you see people frequently dashing across the street or things like that. That would be good to know too, as we think about crossings.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any place.
The one place I see is just north of Ray's.
Yeah.
That street there, people come running across the street there, who must live back. But that's
Yeah, and there's no crosswalk there.
no
There's no
crosswalk.
problem. I see that, that's what I was gonna say too, because I'm at that gym every morning and I will see
It's
people
people crossing
running.
from the gym.
Yeah, they're coming from, they live in the neighborhood behind the gym and they will run or walk. There's a woman who walks very slowly with a cane and a dog. I'm just like, I can't walk.
And it's the same place where the road is about to narrow down. So
Yes.
people are paying attention to that probably and not people crossing.
Mhm. That's where it goes from 45 to 30,
And
or is
also,
it 50 to
it
40,
goes from
50 to 45?
50 to 45 to 30.
But as you're
short
going
distance, but
north.
Going north,
That's where it
it's
narrows.
going from 2 lanes to 1 lane
I see.
and
they
everybody's
speed up.
jockeying for position.
Exactly,
Yes.
and they speed up, because now the
Yes.
speed limit is,
Yes, and they're looking in their rear view mirror to see if they can beat that guy to the.
yes.
Yeah, because no one wants to get stuck behind an RV going
Right.
30 miles per hour.
The other intersection I
Oh,
think.
hold
is-
on. Can I ask a question? For clarification on my end for crossing near Ray's, it was crossing from east to west across that section
Yeah.
that you can't see on this map here.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna look up what the street cross section.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Does anyone know?
Well, it'd be on the west side, because there isn't a street on the.
Oh, yeah, there
Second
is
Street or?
kind of a street. I think what you're talking about is Second Street
Yeah.
East, which is the one that would end I think that's the gym.
Right, yeah, there's
Yeah.
no street
Yeah.
that comes out anywhere.
Yeah,
on
so
101.
it's Second Street and Highway 101.
Okay.
The other intersection I still think is dangerous is by McKay's. And I know the crosswalk was put in. But people don't, they're driving on 101, you have 5 lanes. You've got 2 lanes of traffic, you've got that center lane. And then you have the flashing light. But still, drivers don't see it. And so kids are crossing, they're going to McKay's to get their lunch. That whole thing still makes me nervous. And then even the intersection that you would take to go to McKay's, which is
Are you talking about 10?
10, yeah,
Mhm,
by
that
the
one's
quilt
hard.
store. That whole thing is still, it's so busy, and then you do get delivery trucks there coming into McKay's. So you have trucks and kids trying to cross from school. And people going to McKay's, and in summer, they can't find parking. It's just a very stressful place because it's so busy, but particularly in summer.
Yeah, that also comes up what I call the lazy factor. You got that one crosswalk that ODOT took out when they added the one at 9th Street. So you can go down 9th Street, cross that light, or you go back to 11th Street, cross with the traffic light. Yet they still, if they don't hit that one, they go across wherever they want. I mean, I don't know how you control that.
Well,
If somebody wants to get from point A to point B, they're gonna try it.
yeah, I don't see so much that, Chris, as I see the drivers not seeing the flashing lights where the
Really?
kids are crossing.
I see that light all the time. I thought that was the best thing they ever did.
Oh, I think it's great. I think that we're used to it because we live here, but people that are driving through, you're looking at a lot of different things going on because you've got 5 lanes. I still think it's definitely an improvement, but it's still very busy.
Yeah, I don't know how many crosswalks you put in, like, somebody wants to get the other side of the road, they're gonna go for it. I mean, because it's not that far to walk up the light or walk down to the flashing light, but they still dance across the street.
I think a lot of us, myself included, have been trained to just sort of across Highway 101 where you can. I mean, at least going to Old Town from here, that's sort of, I would just kind of like look and then run for my life across the street. And
And how do you
hope I-
get across from here?
well, now they put in that crosswalk, so you can go down, but I used to just like jet across and it was horrifying. But I mean, I think I would probably be guilty of also crossing at 10th Street, which is what you're talking about at the Asian Garden.
Right.
Like, I don't wanna walk as far down to one of
Yeah.
the lights, and so I just go across if I could. But definitely as a driver, especially at night, it's scary, you can't see people,
Yeah.
so I can understand both sides. But I
And we
think,
also can't always prevent people from running across the street, but just wanting to provide options, as many safe options as possible for, actual crosswalks where people do feel safe and are visible to drivers. So I think it's never going to not happen, but whatever we can do to make it so that doesn't have to happen is going to be the focus.
well, I think, and I just wanna clarify, I think what the conversation or what you guys were getting at is like, every intersection in this sort of busy area where there's lots of stuff going on feels like it should have a crosswalk because there's a reason people want to cross the street. There's other sections of town where we don't have any crosswalks and it's no problem because you're not necessarily trying to get from business to business. But there, people might be going from the Asian Garden or the school over to McKay's, and so it
Right.
feels like there should be more crosswalks in that section.
That might be a question for ODOT on why when they put the one at 9th Street, they took the one at 10th Street out.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe Tom can answer that, I don't know, but I'm guessing they tried to push people to the safe crosswalk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. rather than- Thanks.
So for public transportation, we know that there's not a really highly used fixed route. There is no fixed route within Bandon in particular, but we have the dial-a-bus system. In our stakeholder interviews, a lot of folks didn't know that it existed. So some people that we talked to were saying that if there was more information about it, or if it was easier to use, if it was promoted more, then potentially that could be something that would work a little better for folks. Also, it does require people to plan ahead and schedule their trips ahead of time, which doesn't always work for every kind of trip. Another thing that we heard was desire for more transportation options to Coos Bay and Langley. So there is an intercity bus line right now, but some people voiced that it might not be running at the times that make sense for people working in one place and living in another. So kind of considering options that would take people between cities more comfortably or reliably. Also, people love the trolley, and a lot of people express interest in kind of bringing something similar like that back, or at least some kind of local shuttle, which could operate both as a way to get around town and also as a way to alleviate some parking issues. So if people were taking kind of a shuttle system, then there wouldn't be as much of a parking congestion in the summer or other times of the year when tourism is high. We also looked at the current stop at Ray's, and it's not super obvious that that's where the bus stop is. So maybe, focusing on making that clearer where that stop is and kind of the functional aspects of that stop. Any thoughts from our group on public transportation options?
Well, I've lived here for a while, didn't know there was a dial-a-bus. It's called something else though. Is it it doesn't say dial-a-bus, it's
Dial-a-ride.
dial-a-ride, well,
Yeah, I mean, I know we have the dial-a-ride because I think it's run out of the senior center.
Yeah.
But I don't
okay.
know, Emily might be the dial-a-bus expert in Bandon.
It's
Because
run by Coos, I think it's Coos County Transit. I always get that mixed up if it's Coos County or Curry Transit. But yeah, it's called the Dial-a-Bus, but it's a Dial-a-Ride. The Dial-a-Bus is like the actual name of it that they have. But it just, functions as you have to call them up and reserve. I think it's maybe it's like the day before that you have to schedule a trip, but this was the thing that was vocalized by a lot of folks, especially some people who knew a lot of seniors who would benefit from this system, but just didn't necessarily know about it. So I think the information aspect of it and people not really knowing about it means that it gets underused a lot of the time.
Right, because I'm familiar with that program because my dad used to use it because he's blind, so he can't drive around town. So he would use it to get to various locations. He doesn't so much now, but he was when I first moved here. But I didn't know it was called Dial-a-Bus. So, because I don't ever see any advertising about it. And also I didn't know there was a bus stop at Ray's. That's no idea.
Well, thank you for the input. I think that kind of highlights some of the issues that we've talked about with people and confirmed other things we've heard. So yeah.
And the trolley, hopefully is making a comeback.
We're trying.
We'll see about that one.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, CCAT runs the dial-a-ride and then Curry Public Transit runs the.
CCAT's what's on the bus.
Yeah,
It doesn't say
yes.
dial. It
You're
says
right.
CCAT.
So
So I
it
was
says
like, I've
CCAT.
heard of dial.
And then the Curry Public Transit one is the one that like travels up and down the coast to
Right.
like all the way down to Brookings.
Right, I've taken that one.
And that one is at Ray's, but you're right, I don't think there is a bus stop, like, I've taken it before down to Langwise, and you just go to
two
Ray's and
parking
you just
spaces.
look for it and then get on
It's
it.
in the parking.
Yeah, it's just parked randomly,
Yeah.
so, and then on the trolley front, I don't know if Denise has anything to add on that one, but I think the Public Works Department is looking into whether or not they can retrofit it for ADA accessibility, or whether we have to buy an
Mhm.
updated trolley, just so that everyone knows.
I think you have that right.
Okay, I think that's correct, but I don't wanna
Awesome.
get anyone's hopes up about the trolley if it doesn't run.
In one of the cities that I lived in, we used a electric cart, like a golf cart, except that it held 12 people. People loved it. They just would go up and down, from one end of town to the other. And it just would stop and you could get on and off any time and.
Yeah, that was actually another idea that someone in our community representative interviews brought up about coastal towns and having some interesting ideas about like a golf cart sort of thing. And I think that the one tricky thing would be US 101, how to incorporate that in. But that was also an idea that we heard. Another idea that we heard was just kind of thinking about rideshare services and the ability to provide like a taxi or Lyft or Uber type of service. So that's something that we've heard, and maybe I'm kind of curious if any of you have thought about that idea as well or have any feelings about that.
What prevents us from having Lyft, or
Yeah,
probably because they can't make any money?
Yeah, I don't,
Bingo.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have seen an uptick though in shuttles between
Yeah.
Bandon Dunes, Golf Resort and here. So it does seem like that's sort of the one need that we have isn't maybe necessarily like getting a cab from Old Town to McKay's Market, but kind of getting just to the outer boundaries. I think those shuttles are kind of coming from. But I'd be curious if people actually take taxis or the taxis that we do have
Yeah, right.
anywhere. I can give them a call and see how much business they
Rite
have.
Aid uses the taxi to deliver prescriptions around town.
Interesting.
Fairway Shuttle stays fairly busy,
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah,
but a lot of that's golf traffic back and forth from Bandon Dunes to town.
yeah. And I think like Best Western, because that's like the furthest out.
Yeah.
How I've seen them.
Yeah.
On transit too, I wanted to put Christine on the spot, because I think you brought this up before, but more, maybe less like just our immediate area, but you've talked about how hard it is to get to medical appointments in places like. And so maybe thinking transit to Coos Bay isn't enough, it would be like transit from here to Florence, because Florence has the Rhodey Express that runs more frequently into Eugene. Because I think Eugene is the place where most people go for medical appointments, other than Portland
or Roseburg.
or Roseburg.
Because there is a VA in Roseburg and,
Hmm,
so, that's sort of a little hub too, is Roseburg,
okay.
but.
And I don't think there's any, I'm trying to think of where maybe Coos Bay to Roseburg is a transit line. I don't know.
I haven't heard of it.
Great. Thank you so much for the input. Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you now to talk a little bit more about some more focused US 101 discussions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Guevara with Oregon Department of Transportation. I just want to give a little bit of background on US 101 function, capacity, and performance standards that apply to 101 as it transitions through the city of Bandon. I think a couple things I want to just get clarified. I saw the previous slide said 101's a state freight route. I don't think that's correct. US 101 is a designated statewide highway under the Oregon Highway Plan, meaning that the purpose of that highway is it starts at the Oregon-California border and goes to the Washington Oregon border, and it's to move high volumes of traffic in an efficient manner. It's also what we call a review reduction route, and that's an ORS 366215 route. And what that means is for freight purposes, even though it's not a designated freight route, for freight purposes, ODOT can't reduce the hole in the air through that highway that would limit large loads from going through there today. So meaning that if you have large heavy loads of freight traffic that can pass through the highway today, we can't introduce any improvement that would limit those large vehicles from passing through in the future. So that's something that we'll have to consider. The third thing is 101 is what we call a federal designated principal arterial highway. And so that's the federal classification. And then the question mark for me was whether the city had a designation of 101 as an arterial or major arterial. I wasn't sure. And the reason that's important, all these designations that I've spoke about have minimum requirements, minimum standards, but we can apply city standards to 101 within the city boundaries as long as they're not less restrictive than the minimum standards. But if they are more restrictive than the minimum standards, then through the TSP process, by identifying those more restrictive standards, and if ODOT ever did a project in the future, they would refer to your TSP and see what those requirements are. So that's just a little bit of background. ODOT Region 3 manages 101 from the California-Oregon border all the way to Gardner. Then Region 2 takes over from there. So what we're managing is this highway on how it transitions through various cities and various communities. So like I said, the purpose of 101 is to get from point A to point B in the most efficient manner possible. But we also recognize when 101 enters an urban area, the function changes because now it's no longer 55 miles an hour straight shot from Bandon to Coos Bay. Is you have urban populations, you have pedestrians using the roadway, you have urbanization along the roadway. So those things all come into play on how we manage this facility as it transitions through the city of Bandon. So what we're looking at is how it exists today, and then we'll get into what the forecast for the future is. And those will be some of the discussion items of how do you want it to function in the future, recognizing how 101 functions today. So what we see coming from north to south, so 101's a 55 mile an hour coming from Coos Bay into Bandon from the north. It starts transitioning to 45 miles an hour, right? I don't know what the name of that street is, but just prior to getting to the 42-101 intersection. So you have 55 miles an hour. I think it's 4 or 5 lanes through there. And as it transitions into that intersection, it goes down to 45. As it moves south, it transitions to 30 miles an hour. And then it starts picking up speed again, heading south out of town, back to 45, then back to 55. So you can see how it's transitioning in speeds as it comes through the community. A lot of that also has the number of lanes. So we have speeds and lanes. So coming from the north to south, 101 is 2 lanes. Then I think when we say 2 lanes, if it has a center median lane, that's what we call a 2-lane with a 2-way turn lane. So that's a 3-lane cross section. Then it transitions, it goes from 2 to 5 lanes, and then it transitions back, or 2 to 4 lanes. Then it transitions to 5 lanes. Then it transitions back to 3 lanes south of town. And that's how 101 functions today in your community, and how those transitions are occurring of moving traffic through the community that are trying to get from point A to point B. But we also recognize you have some urban development along 101, especially in your downtown core. So that urban development puts more demand on the facility above and beyond what's passing through the community. And those are some of the things that we look at is what's being produced today that's putting demand on 101. You could go to the next one. And then what is forecasted to happen in the future. So there are some trends, and I heard some really good discussion, and it makes sense on what you're describing of some of the bicycle and pedestrian issues on 101. And if you could look at this segment, your highest concentration of crashes is in the number 12. You're seeing a lot of crashes there. You have some fatalities just south of that on 101, but all of that, your crashes are occurring in that core area, which is, I believe, that's where it transitions, the speeds and the number of lanes transition. It don't seem to be a lot of crashes north of the 42-101 intersection, or a lot of crashes south of the 11th Street and 101 intersection. So that gives you a good focal point of how do you, how would you improve safety on that segment on 101, not only today, but well into the future. Some of the other things that we look at are bike and pedestrian deficiencies. Sidewalks along 101 generally are not separated from vehicle. So just to give you a little bit of background, and in the tech memo that they had some level of stress ratings for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And the way those ratings work is the facility safe for like kids and families, or is a facility, the higher the ranking, the more skilled bicyclists or pedestrian you would have to be, because now you have higher volumes of traffic, higher speeds of roadway, and wider roadway. So as you push more volumes of traffic and higher speeds, it becomes less safe for people walking and biking, and that's going to affect your level of stress. So typically when you have those higher speed roadways and you have 4 or 5 lanes, you have to separate the bike and pedestrian facilities to create a buffer between the roadway and bicycles and pedestrians, so that they feel safe in using those facilities. So that's one of the things to look at. And when we look at the existing condition, there are no bike lanes on 101, especially from 42 South to 13th Street. So we have what we call the ODOT's blueprint of urban design. And what that really allows us to do is, when we look at the urban context of how 101 traverses the local government, we identify what those classifications are. We apply a classification, and what you're looking at is, in the future, 20 years down the line, how is 101 to function in the community? And then we apply a classification. In those classifications, we have minimum design standards. We call that urban design. And the blueprint for urban design is saying, through the downtown area, you need to separate bicycle facilities, especially through the commercial context. If we cannot meet those minimum requirements, it requires that ODOT do a design exception, and that would have to go through our process of our roadway design, our roadway section, and they would have to approve any improvement that doesn't meet that requirement as an exception to the minimum requirements. And that's not a guarantee, but that would be something as we get into alternatives, we'll want to see if we can meet these requirements. If not, we'll need a design exception. The good thing about 101 is we don't seem to have any capacity issues. So when we talk about capacity, ODOT standards is what is the volume versus the capacity of the roadway, especially at intersections, and is there adequate capacity to support growth? And what we're identifying is, as 101 comes through the city, the only intersection that there seems to be some capacity issues that we'll have to address is at the 101-42 intersection. Outside of that, there doesn't seem to be any capacity issues. So one of the things we look at is, when we're talking capacity, we're talking the capacity of an intersection, but we're also talking about the capacity of the roadway. So rule of thumb for ODOT on any state highway is a 2-lane, 3-lane cross section is adequate to support up to 18,000 average daily trips. And when we're talking average daily trips, that means on a daily basis, you're averaging about 18,000 trips per day. When we start getting over 18,000 average daily trips, then we have to start looking at a 4-lane, 5-lane cross section. And just to give you an idea, I-5 is what we would call a 5-lane or 4-lane, 2 lanes in each direction. It's designed to handle up over 20,000 average daily trips on a daily basis. So that gives you an idea of when we're looking at 4-lane, 5-lane cross sections. That's the demand that the highway is supporting on a daily basis. So we're not seeing any capacity issues. We do have some safety issues that need to be addressed, but the majority of issues that the consultant has been identifying really gets down to how do you improve 101 to be safer for bicycle and pedestrians using the highway and crossing the highway, and looking at the crash analysis and looking at the lack of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. It becomes more of a bike and ped facility plan versus a motor vehicle plan. And that sort of summarizes the issues of 101 and our role with the city and how we manage 101 through the city of Bandon. Any questions?
How big's a bike lane?
5 feet.
You can put 5 feet up there, still wouldn't feel safe.
Riding a bike.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not a chance.
And that's why the Oregon Blueprint of Urban Design is recommending you separate bicycle and pedestrian facilities from the roadway for that exact reason. What happens, the reason it becomes important, as speeds and volume of traffic increases on the roadway, there's no area for correction for the vehicle. So if the vehicle goes off the roadway, they're gonna get into the bike and pedestrian facilities because they're abutting the roadway. The purpose of adding the buffer or even separating it for the roadway, as motor vehicles are traveling at higher speeds and higher volumes of traffic, if they do go off the roadway, there's a correction they can make before entering the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And that's why that is recommended to improve safety.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom.
All right, thank you.
So next we're going to talk about future conditions. And this analysis that we conducted kind of thinks through what Bandon is going to look like in the future. Our year that we're looking at is 2045. And it's a scenario where essentially the transportation system, what's it going to look like in the future, taking into consideration projects that are actually funded and ready to be built. So for our purposes for the roadway, there was one bridge project that's funded, but it wouldn't change roadway systems. So essentially for the actual road system, what the transportation system looks like now is going to generally be the same in our future no build condition. This is kind of a lot on this slide. So does anyone have any questions just to start about what the future conditions analysis kind of encompasses? We're basically analyzing traffic, considering just the projects that are funded are going to be built.
So I think I want to clarify just to make sure everyone knows.
Yes.
I feel like I'm always confused with this stuff. What we're going over now is if nothing else is built, we have the same transportation system as now, but we are going to be looking at like sort of almost pulling levers about what happens if all of our land use as it's zoned now built out, or that we don't take that into consideration. Or like the projected population growth that we get from PSU, like is that in this scenario or no?
Yeah, thank you, Dana. That's a really good point.
Well, I'm just I think I'm asking a question a little bit.
Oh.
Emily, I'll jump in here and just say, yes, yes, Dan. So that the future conditions looks at what is the projected future population 20 years out? What is the future land use? like you just reviewed there. And says basically, if we don't do anything else between now and 20 years from now, what kind of problems would arise with transportation? So
Okay.
that's helpful for us to understand, what problems, often what happens, right, is certain problems get worse, right? Or certain problems that already exist today, be they safety or traffic, still exist in the future if we don't address them now, right? So
That makes sense. I appreciate the clarification. So it's if the transportation system stays the same, but everything else around it changes, what kinds of issues are we gonna see? Okay.
exactly.
I have a question. I read the 20-year plan from 20 years ago
Mhm.
and was astounded that really nothing in that plan got done.
Right.
And so here we are 20 years later, and you're asking us another 20 years later. I get real concerned because we didn't do anything, very little, out of that from 20 years ago. And so now here it is, and now we have what we have, which I think could be better and could be improved.
Yes.
If we do nothing for another 20 years, then that means we are now 40 years. And 40 years ago, the population was would have been, even 20 years ago, the population isn't what it is today. And what it's going to be. The county is growing around us. Developers have found us, tourists have found us. Bandon won't look like Bandon in 20 years. It doesn't look like it did back in the 70s when I first got here. I think a future of no build is not possible.
Well, and I think to maybe just to answer from one side, I think that this is just a scenario plan, right? So it's that we can see if we grow, what the big stress points on our transportation system are gonna be. So it's really just a scenario planning. It's not saying we're not gonna do anything.
Yes.
And to the point about I don't think anything has happened in the last 20 years. I think you're probably right that very little has come out of that particular plan. And likely that's from the city's perspective of there wasn't a really great capital improvement plan that then got adopted into the city budget and that the city council could look at and say, oh, we've got to check these things off of our list. And we've also been pretty budget constrained for the last 20 years. And I think are just sort of finding our way into being able to pay for public improvements again. But for other people maybe who are here the last 20 years, I was not, you might have other opinions about how things did or did not build out. I'm looking at Chris, because I know you've been on the city council for a long time.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. There's no money.
Yeah.
So.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of why we want to take into consideration the cost effectiveness when we look at planning projects in this plan. Making some projects be really easily implemented without a ton of money, because it doesn't make sense to have a lot of really great but really expensive projects that might not actually happen.
And
Yeah.
two other quick points, just that also we want to make sure when we're not there yet, but when we get to solutions, we want to figure out how to align those with all the grants we know about that the city can apply for, right? That's going to be the ticket to a lot of things. And then second, the other piece is knowing that there is a lot of development coming in to Bandon. It's really important to have these projects on paper so that if development comes in, the city has leverage in terms of saying, hey, our plan is to have a sidewalk on this street or what have you to get the developer to actually implement pieces of the TSP.
Yeah, to that point, I was gonna say that I think our last plan where we as staff struggled with it is very aspirational and not very achievable. So it's we wanna have sidewalks everywhere. Well, how are we gonna do that unless our code says when you build, you also have to build a sidewalk. So it was a very dreamy dream plan that didn't have those SMART goals, right? Measurable and achievable, that kind of thing. So I think what we're hoping to do this time around is, like they said, cost effective, but also possible that we can actually do them. And keep track of how much we're actually doing or who we're requiring to do certain things. Like, I'll give you an example too, as our last plan said we would require bike parking at all new businesses, but we never put that in the code, so how can we ever require it? So just a big disconnect. It was a big project at the time, so hoping to do that as part of this project, so we actually make some changes. Okay, thanks. Back to you guys.
Right. So looking at traffic, considering this scenario that we just went over where the transportation system basically looks the same as it does today, we ran a traffic analysis to see what might be more of an issue in the future. And it turns out that same 42S intersection was the one intersection that we flagged as being an issue in the future, as well as an issue today. So the level of service being, how the cars can move through the intersection, and mobility targets, as we talked about in the last, when we were discussing this intersection, just not being able to move cars efficiently through this intersection. So the same intersection is flagged in the future as we have flagged as existing conditions today.
I got a question with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, intersection, you have a left turn lane on, I believe it's all four corners.
Yes.
At the one at Fillmore, there's no left turn lane at all, so why is Fillmore not the one that's reaches volume to capacity? I mean, you've got a lane that'll go right, you've got a left turn lane you can get into at to either go to Ray's or go out to Van Supply. I don't understand how that one's in capacity, but the one down at Fillmore isn't.
Fillmore had the biggest number of accidents reported on that little chart.
Right, that's the dangerous intersection.
This,
I'm
oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I'm guessing that one reaches that capacity because people are coming from the north and turning onto 42. So they're actually like using that as an interchange, maybe that's the right word,
Yeah, but you've
to
got
go somewhere.
you
So they're
got
not
light-
making it all the way down to
true,
Fillmore.
but you got a light there that'll stop people and let them turn versus where at Fillmore, you gotta
Yeah.
I think that's one of the
chance.
easier intersections in town.
Yeah, I think that might be, and Emily or Ryan, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we might be talking about two different things. So the volume to capacity ratio would be like how many people are just moving through the intersection. And you're talking about like how safe people are when they're turning.
Well, I'm
Or
talking
how-
about it, if you
yeah.
got, I understand coming north, you got some that come through, but if for going north. Let me get this straight. I don't think there's that many cars that are coming from Coos Bay down that are gonna turn right or left. I think they're going through. So I'm still not sold on the volume to capacity thing.
I'm sure we have numbers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, forgive me because I'm not a traffic engineer, and maybe Ryan, you can jump in here.
So, yeah, Emily, so a couple things real fast, sorry, and this is actually, this is a mea culpa on my part, but we just updated some of the existing conditions analysis, and the volume to capacity ratio at Oregon 42S is actually within the acceptable range. The level of service is still kind of getting down there, which means that sometimes some vehicles trying to turn at that intersection are delayed more than we'd want them to be. In talking with our traffic engineer, it might just be a traffic signal timing issue that can be easily addressed and something we could, talk with ODOT more down the road. And then at Fillmore, I'm looking at the results there too, and we don't, while it's a busier intersection, it doesn't cross that threshold into being above what the standard is.
And Ryan, could you briefly state the difference between the volume to capacity ratio and the level of service, just so that we know what level of service means?
Yeah, sorry. So they're very closely related concepts. But I think the thing for everyone to know is they're both measures essentially of delay. So they focus on slightly different things, but what they're really getting at is basically how long are we making people wait at a given intersection? How backed up is an intersection?
think, again, on that intersection we're talking about, the only time I experience delay is when the left turn arrow doesn't come on, even when it should, so I think it's a signal delay.
Yeah, I understand what it should be a signal problem,
But you're saying overall, you feel like Fillmore and 101 feels much longer or more challenging than 42 and Highway 1?
yeah, if you're coming down 101, you're gonna take a left and go up to Bannon Supply.
Mhm.
You gotta watch real carefully, cause sometimes you don't get through, that's why I won't go into the middle of the intersection, I wait. Cause all of a sudden, if the light turns, you're screwed.
Mhm.
Right, right.
And see, the other one up there, if I wanna go to Ray's, I just get in the lane and wait for it.
Yeah,
And sometimes I have to wait twice, even though I was the first
Right.
one in line, but gives me time to think.
so it's like the perception or how you feel when you're on those two.
Well,
I'm scared every time I come down Fillmore and I'm making a right turn onto 101 for two reasons. One is because there's no turn lane there
Mhm.
and there's all those hatch marks there, so people shouldn't be
Right.
driving there,
Right.
but people do.
Do.
And then you start making your right turn, you find out there's somebody to the right of you. The other side you can't see because the museum is there,
Yeah.
so you can't see what's coming from the south.
And then if you're a cyclist,
Oh,
you have the bike lane.
Yeah.
At least it had the bike lane.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you're trying to make a left, everybody behind you's gotta wait for you.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Whereas if you're going to Ray's, you pull off, those other cars go straight on through, go to Coos Bay.
Right.
So I-
Yeah, when I'm going south on 101, I don't get in the left lane to, because traffic's, because someone's gonna turn and you have to wait, and so I just
That's
always,
always me.
yeah. And they don't put their signal on, maybe at all, or very at the last minute, and then, so I always go past that intersection and then switch lanes. Exactly what I did this morning coming here. The one other thing I would wanna add, because I know we're running out of time, or at least I know I have to go pretty soon. What is not currently an intersection, but I think is gonna be a big challenge in the future is what will be or maybe not, I don't know, 101 and Seabird. It's already really hard to make a left turn
Yeah.
from Seabird onto 101 going north. And that's before, new construction goes in,
Right.
various apartments and various other things. That's a scary intersection.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's another intersection that I wanted to mention briefly that, I think Tom, Dana, we're already having kind of a conversation about what we might look at there. And I think, not to punt this entirely, but I think we'll have more to talk about at the next meeting about that Seabird intersection.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. So for future conditions, walking and biking, again, just to reiterate, it'll be kind of the same as it is now, except we have the Jetty Park Trail going in. So in this future condition scenario, that Jetty Park Trail is there, but everything else is the same. So that connection is going to be great for connecting Old Town to the jetty. But then the other pedestrian and biking systems throughout the town, we'll have to still look at for improvements throughout Bandon. And then as we talked about with increases in population and tourists coming in, we want to make sure that the future pedestrian and bicycle systems in Bandon are going to accommodate these increases that are predicted to happen. So we kind of talked about some of these as we walked through the slides, but just kind of to bring it back to the conditions that we have going on in Bandon now and how you feel like things work or don't. Prominent issues and needs maybe that we didn't touch upon today that you'd like to bring up, or just any other general thoughts. We don't have a lot of time left, but any kind of concluding thoughts that people might have about our existing conditions discussion.
Well, if I can chime in here, I've been listening to this meeting, it's really great. But I want to say that I do agree that Seabird and 101 intersection needs attention. And one of the thoughts I have, I don't know if it's possible or not, but if it can have a traffic light that somehow can sense when there's someone coming from Seabird needing to turn left on 101. And so that way, maybe it doesn't work on a timer and traffic doesn't have to be through traffic on 101 doesn't have to be stopped periodically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Pam, and as Ryan said, we are talking about that particular intersection and trying to figure out what we can do there. So we'll be bringing some ideas, I think at the next PAC meeting, when we start looking at alternatives, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
We go quickly to next steps. Emily. And just to be clear, like this is not our last opportunity to talk about issues and needs, right? Like that's going to be, we're going to keep talking about that at our future meetings. But again, if there's something burning that you wanted to get out there, please email Dana and we'll get that from her as well. But a couple of things. One, we've got an online open house, which is a website that people can go to and review some of the issues we talked about today and provide us, the team in the city, some feedback on those issues. So we're going to, Dana, I don't know if we sent that out to the PAC. I don't think so, but it'd be great if you all could help send that around to your friends, family, and everybody else to help drive participation in that.
Yes, when we're done with this meeting, I'll send it out to all of you. Also, just always a plug that we have an email subscription on the city's website. And we do have a resident surveys thing you can sign up for. So that's what we'll be sending it out on. So if you know people who want to provide like public input in the future, that's a great place to make sure they're going right into your inbox. But we do appreciate you getting the word out too. And we'll have it posted on the city's website as well.
Yeah. And is there one more slide, Emily, I think we have on general next steps? Okay, so next, like I said, the next step is we're going to get into talking about actual ideas for addressing some of these things. So the next couple of meetings will be really critical. We'll be in touch on getting the next one scheduled. And thanks again for your time and input here. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, everyone. We talked about policy. Yeah, that's fine.